Okay, comrades. The Egyptian Revolution has had a demonstration on Saturday in support of the Egyptian workers. It was wasn't incredibly large, but it was very passionate. I don't know, 100, 200 people there, perhaps?
Yeah,
no. But it's a brilliant example of a popular uprising, a workers' uprising. They're absolutely determined to win. They're beginning to organise themselves. They're becoming highly organised in what's called, I think they've called themselves organising committees. There are people constantly going into Tahrir Square. Tahrir means liberation, so it's Liberation Square. There are a constant flow of people in and out. They're beginning to organise themselves in shifts, which they have to, because they can't sustain themselves unless they're really organised. So there are medical supplies going in, there's food going in, and there are barricades. They barricade themselves in, and they're beginning to organise themselves, which is an excellent sign, a classic beginnings of a revolution. And we have to ask, what's driven this? What's driven this incredible movement of hundreds of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people? And really, the great majority of Egyptian population, which is 80 million, behind the demonstrators. It's strange that a number of middle-class people turned up at the Tahrir Square, and when it got violent, the middle-class people shot off, and it was left with workers to battle with the Mubarak thugs. There's a whole layer of people who the state have got organised against the workers. There's a police force, a highly organised police force, called the Baltageri. They're secret police in Arino uniform. They're highly organised. They're supported by the police who know who they are. They've been involved with them. Then they've got these, what they call sandal supporters. Basically, you buy them a pair of shoes and they'll turn up at a demo and hit some demonstrators. They're called sandals or shoe demonstrators, because that's all it costs. They're lumpen elements in Cairo. They're lumpen elements who can be bought off just with a few shekels, really. So what we have to look at what's driving this force, and there are two facts. One is the incredible poverty, and if you go to Cairo, if you ever get the chance, it's a fascinating city to go to. Fascinating city for its history, for its liveliness, for its passion. People are very passionate, very friendly people, incredibly friendly people, given that they're so poor. And it's been estimated that 60% of Egyptians are in poverty. 40% are between extreme and poverty. So the great, huge sections of society are in absolute poverty. Now, there's a book written by a guy called John Bradley, called Inside Egypt. Fascinating book. Its subtitle is The Land of the Pharaohs on the Brink of a Revolution. He predicted this revolution almost, well, he said 2010, I think, in his book. And he was interviewed on Al Jazeera tonight, actually, and he was asked why people laughed at your book, at your prediction. He said, why did they laugh at it when it turned out to be true? He said, I've been living with the Egyptians, and I speak fluent Egyptian Arabic. There are different dialects in the Arab world. Egyptian dialect is a bit different. They can all understand each other, but it's quite a strong dialect, different from other countries. So he's lived with, for 10 years, most of the 10-year period, previous 10-year period, he'd lived with the Arab people. And over that time, increasingly, people were saying, we have to have a revolution. Ordinary working Egyptians were saying to him, we have to have a revolution. We can't take this interminable poverty, this massive unemployment rate. Unemployment is really high. It's 25%. It's something crazy unemployment rate. And amongst pockets in Cairo, and if you go to Cairo, you go through certain areas where the poverty is just almost unbelievable poverty. People are living on just a couple of dollars a day, trying to sell shoes or recycle rubbish. And I think that's the biggest driving point, the absolute poverty of the Egyptian people. Alongside the poverty, and because of the poverty, the state has been extremely oppressive. There's never been a democratic election in Egypt. 30 years ago, there was a guy called Anwar Sadat, who was the puppet of America. He was assassinated, and this guy Mubarak, he was a general, he took over and has promised elections every year and has never had any elections. And I said, in order to suppress people, he's had this special police, this secret police force, as well as the main police. For some strange reason, the army has not been against workers, although it's not completely true what's coming on the television, because they have restricted people. When people have gone to Tahrir Square, they strip search them, they get their identities and they record who they are. They have been, the media is playing this idea that the army are friendly with the workers. They're not. But they're not beating them up like the police are, like the secret police are. They're not hounding them, they're not chasing them back to their homes and arresting different members of the family. What the strange things happened in the last 3 or 4 years is that what's mushroomed is the social networking. They do a lot of blogging. They have these blogs. It's like Twitter. You write a few lines on the thing, and then someone else can go onto your blog, and they write a few lines back. And these blogging things mushroomed. It's similar to Facebook. Facebook is there, but this whole thing is mushroomed, and it's predominantly middle class, educated people that are doing it. But they've been organising demos and organising get-togethers and discussions on how oppressive the state is. And it's those people that have been increasingly arrested over the last few years. They're getting arrested, they're getting out, they're getting back on the blogs, and they've been radicalised, if you like. The middle classes, the young middle classes, have been radicalised because of the brutality of the state. So those two things have driven this revolution. There were people in The Economist and people in the bourgeois press and the journalists in Cairo who laughed at this guy for saying there's going to be a revolution. But he knew, because people were telling him, we're fed up with the oppression, we're fed up with the poverty, and there has to be a revolution. And another thing that's in Egypt, to an incredible degree, is corruption. It's one of the most corrupt countries in the whole world. Everything you do in Egypt, you have to know someone, you have to pay someone. Or nothing happens. If you get fined, if you get an infringement of some sort, you can pay your way out of it. But if you're one of the 60% of the poor people in poverty, you can't pay your way out of it. It's called wasta. Wasta means, it's an Arabic word for influence, somebody influential that you can go to, or you've got some influence over someone. And of course the working poor, or the unworking poor in Cairo, have got no wasta. So everything that happens to them is negative. So this guy, this John Bradley, was saying that what's been building up particularly in Cairo, but also in Alexandria, is a deep sense of hate, a deep sense of hopelessness, and that is why these workers now are so determined that this is not going to fail. They also know, by the way, that if they do fail, they've been on TV, they're going to be targeted by the state, they're going to be visited, not just them, but their family members also. So that's another reason why they're going to refuse to give in. There'll be more blood, without question, there'll be more blood to come, because the workers are so determined, and of course the state is so determined to defeat them. But we have to look at why, because what a lot of them are saying, and we've got a comrade apparently, who's in Tahrir Square, and he's reported back and he's written an article for the
Central.
So the CWI, and he's obviously or she, obviously an Arabic speaker, because he just can hear what's going on all the time, and what he said is that they are organised, but they're not organised enough. They have to. One of our demands on the petition is for workers' committees to defend themselves. They've got to be more structured. And in fact, they need to start arming themselves in some way to protect themselves against these constant attacks that are occurring. Because these two levels, if you like, the unofficial sandalmen, if you like, and the secret police, they're working in shifts. They're going home and getting rests while another shift goes to attack them. And so they're constantly, but the workers are not, they're not organised well enough as yet. Now, what a lot of these groups are saying is that all we need is an election. If they have an election, we'll solve the problem. Of course, we know who will get elected is a capitalist, a military guy or a civilian like the Al-Baladi. Al-Baladi was involved in Iraq recently, in the last few years ago. He was employed by the United Nations to look for weapons of mass destruction, which were never there. He's come back. He's a candidate for the leadership. The Americans will support him because they know they can trust him, because he lied for the Americans during the search for bombs. He knew there was nothing there, but he never said. Kept his mouth shut. But a lot of these groups are saying that, according to our comrade on the ground, is that, let's not discuss things like socialism. Let's not discuss things like who we can get elected. Let's not discuss these things. We'll discuss them after. It's this two-stage theory that, because what they want is rid of Mubarak. You know, for them to get rid of Mubarak would be a huge movement. But as we know, it wouldn't solve the fundamental problems, because the fundamental problems in Egypt is a backward capitalist economy. That's the fundamental problem, and the fundamental reason why there's 60% of poverty, and it's the fundamental reason why there's the massive oppression to crush people who try to rebel against that poverty. And we know the only real solution is to start a party that's going to campaign for a socialist Egypt. And there is, strange enough, there are the beginnings of it in Tahrir Square. There are beginnings of Soviets. That's what these people are. They're building a Soviet before our eyes. They're getting more and more organised. They're thinking through. They're planning through. They're beginning to organise the income of water, of food, of medicine, of getting people in and out, of starting to work in shifts. That's the beginning of the Soviets. The beginning of socialism. And if only, as we always say, if we had a party there, we would have profound influence. The people who are growing, who've got the influence, the only people who are organised are the Muslim Brotherhood. They're the ones that are organised. They're the ones that have been trained to speak. They're the ones that are getting the attention. Egypt is really, it's a Muslim society. 80% of them are Muslims. But they're secular Muslims. They're not fundamentalist Muslims, you know. I know a lot of Egyptians, a lot of them, they drink, you know. Not supposed to drink. But they drink. They're very relaxed, you know. They're very cool, and most of them are not fundamentalists. They don't even pray. A lot of them, they don't. You know, well, some of them do, but many of them don't go to mosques. But they believe in Islam. You know, they're not unbelievers, but they're quite secular. Let's put it that way. And they're not influenced, and they don't want the Muslim Brotherhood. They don't want an Islamic State. They don't want that. In fact, a brilliant demonstration of the worker attitude, when on Fridays is always like our Sundays, pray day, so no work day, not allowed to work. When the Muslims start praying, and they go and get on the ground, they stand up and they go through their prayer, the Coptic Christians line the outside and they protect them. And they held hands and locked hands. That's awesome. What they're saying is, we don't care about religion. We can be Christian, we can be Coptic Christian, we can be Muslim, we don't care. We're together and we're standing together and you're not breaking us up. And that's fantastic, brilliant beginnings, if you like, of the Egyptian Revolution. A fantastic example of working class unity and working class determination. So all the beginnings there, the beginnings of the Soviets are there, the beginnings of organising committees, defence committees. They have to organise better with the defence committees. They have to organise better with committees who are going to organise the food, who are going to organise different aspects of the whole campaign. And if they don't organise and they don't spread, they have to march on the presidential palace. They have to do that. They don't want to do that. The army will stop them from doing it, but they have to do it. They have to spread it. What the army are doing, the army are crushing them into smaller places. Tahrir Square is a huge roundabout. If you go to the Cairo Museum, you can see this huge square, this huge space from the Cairo Museum, which, by the way, the workers defended, because there was people starting to loot in the Cairo. The Cairo Museum is the most amazing place on this planet. It's just, you walk into it and there's things that you've seen as a kid right in front of you behind a plate glass. It's just awesome. And there's esophagus and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, they defended that stuff and they prevented Lucas from stealing from it. In the end, virtually nothing was stolen. They're a proud people of their history, you know. I mean, the bosses used this one-liner against the Americans, I mean, for the wrong reasons. They said, what's a 200-year country telling a 7,000-year-old country what to do? I mean, so in a way, you can understand the argument that they've got. They are a proud people, but there are two people in Egypt. There's the ruling class, who, by the way, tonight are in the film review, and last night were in an opera. And these Egyptians see these ruling class people drive around in big limos. They've got their own golf courses where it's all cordoned off. They have their own living areas. They're seen by the Egyptian people. They know there's a ruling class here, a brutal ruling class, who love Mubarak. They think Mubarak is God, these people. Whereas the workers think he's the devil. So the beginnings of socialism are there. It's the only solution. There will be no solution unless a revolution begins to ferment and grow and develop. Obviously, this time is the first time. It's probably maybe we're looking at 1905, the first wave. There'll be other waves, but at least now there'll be a tradition where the workers have begun to organise part of society. Cairo is by far and away the biggest city. The second biggest city is Alexandria. The Muslim Brotherhood, by the way, have an even bigger group in Alexandria. And this John Bradley says that the Muslim Brotherhood are very, very sharp, very clever. They don't want to stand for elections now because they know they haven't got sway over society as the Islamists have in other Arab societies, Islamic societies. So what they're trying to do is, they're trying to be the best fighters. They operate like we do in many ways. When they go into a battle, they're alongside the workers and they are trying to be the bravest fighters and the best speakers to win the hearts and minds of those radicals. But if they do, as John Bradley says, and he's absolutely right, if they do win the hearts and minds of those leading, they're predominantly young people, then that would be a very negative, bad outcome. We don't want an Islamist state, we want a socialist state. We want a state that's not controlled by a few imams, but by the mass of workers in a democratic socialist society. So, hopefully communism has a few, to help communism understand exactly what's going on, and I'm sure communists can make other contributions, and I'll leave it there.
Thank you, John.